Welcome aboard. You're listening to Flight Plan Quick Consults, your go-to podcast for veterinary insights that are fast, focused, and designed to elevate your practice. I'm your host, Brenda Tassava Medina from Encore Veterinary Consulting. Whether you're between appointments or heading into a strategy session, we've got takeoff ready tips, tools, and takeaways to keep your team soaring. So buckle up and let's chart today's course to exploring your leaders are exhausted and so are you. Today's panel includes Dr. Evan Ware, Dr. Chip Cooney, and Dr. Amy Tate. I had a partners meeting this week with one of my clients. I typically do this monthly with my clients if there's a group of partners or it's a one-on-one owners meeting. But an interesting comment was made by one of the partners at my meeting yesterday. And she said, this is all well and good, but where we're falling short is accountability. That's where we fall down. So, how do you build accountability without becoming the bottleneck or the bad guy? Let's start with you, Dr. Cooney.
Oh, okay. Um, so I don't know, maybe it's a unique perspective on this, but if you're the bottleneck, then you're the problem. Because if you're the bottleneck, you haven't built an appropriate structure of accountability within your clinic. You know, my leaders are accountable to me, but then those leaders have accountability to the people who are underneath them, who they oversee in the situation. So, if you set up the correct expectations, then it's not then there shouldn't be a bottleneck. We should work, each department work through their leader, and if something escalates all the way to me, then I'm dealing with that one person um, with that particular department. I think the key is you got to hire good people. Of course, that's a totally different discussion and probably would make up multiple podcasts, right? Um, but then you coach them and how you want them to lead, and then you let them go and you let them do the thing that you've coached them to do. And then when they inevitably make a mistake, then you sit down with them and we coach them through the mistake so that they understand how we could have better handled this situation. Um, these are people that are leading your practice or growing your practice. So you're not scolding them, you're not berating them. We're trying to help them understand what we're trying to do to keep this situation from becoming a bigger deal. Um, there's a book I read called The Coaching Habit. I don't know if any of you guys have ever read that
I
before.
love that book.
I do too. It's a perspective where when you talk with your leaders, you ask leading questions. So they ask you a question, you don't give them the answer that you want. You lead them to the answer you're looking for. So you help them get there by having them think through the situation. And the studies show that if you do this, that it's much more likely to stick with that person, and the next time it comes up, they're on it. And you're also empowering your leader by doing this. So I'm a big fan of working with your leaders so that you don't have to make all these decisions every day. I've reached a point where I've got people that make these decisions for me because they know how I would respond in that situation. You talk about being the bad guy, and we shouldn't have a bad guy, just like we shouldn't have a bottleneck. If you've hired to your core values and you set your appropriate protocols to how you want your practice to run, and then when you hold people accountable, it shouldn't be a surprise when you're holding them accountable because they haven't lived up to your protocol or your standards that you set. It's the expectation that you have set to work for you. Now, I'm not saying that somebody does something wrong and we fire them on the spot by any stretch, but they are held accountable for their situation. If it continues to be a problem, then they're obviously not a fit for this team, and there's a better place for them. So I think not holding them accountable is actually worse than quote unquote being the bad guy and holding them accountable because you're telling them your standards are just arbitrary and they're really unimportant. Um, So you need to set up who you are, and if people want to work for who you are, then the accountability is just part of it.
Yeah, I find that it's consistency that's like the magic thing that makes accountability work.
Right.
What about you, Dr. Tate? How do you build accountability without becoming the bad guy or the bottleneck?
Well, since I had been the bad guy in the past, um, I kind of revamped that recently. Um, and I wasn't the bad guy in the fact that that I was doing anything wrong other than holding the team accountable. It was just I was the only one doing it. And so it felt to everybody that I was in fact the bad guy. So bringing in support for that and structure, like Dr. Cooney said, and coaching those people in your accountability system to use the chart of accountability and to hold the others in their particular section up to the standards of the core values. Like if you're not bought into the core values and you're in a leadership meeting and that leader's not bought in, then that's a net negative, right? Like you're losing ground there.
Yes.
Um, and and we've, I've had to learn the hard way that even though they're nodding their head and saying that they agree if their actions do not carry through when they leave that meeting, they're not really bought in. They're just telling you kind of what you want to hear. And so, it's buy-in through the whole process. And then once you get that person who's bought in, just let them do their job. Trust them enough that you've seen their behavior and action to get out of the way and let them do what they need to do. And then, continue the cycle of check-ins so that there's always an open communication to keep that accountability process active. But, sometimes it can lean toward feeling a little micromanaging, but I think it should be more of like an open back and forth communication that's just kind of ongoing so the communication flows both ways. But it's making sure you have the right people to do that part, to help you do that part for you.
The right people in the right seats and everyone aligned.
Right. I mean, you can row a canoe, but if both people are on opposite sides of the canoe paddling differently, you don't get anywhere. Or you end up in a circle, or you end up, whatever the analogy is. But yeah, I mean, everybody's got to kind of be wanting to move forward together. And, um, you know, uh, I know everybody says it, and it's always true. Once you go back and lean into those core values and that mission and vision, and you keep it on the forefront of every conversation that you have, the people that don't fit well into that vision that you want to create, that forward planning, that you sit down and say that what do I want this to look like and how do we get there? Um, then sometimes those people they for whatever reason they can't, don't want to stay, and that's okay. I mean, that's another hard lesson that I've learned, that it's okay to part ways with people, and because they weren't good fits for your long term goal. And you definitely got to know where you want to end, so you can work toward that goal, that strategic planning. You got to know where you want to be so that you can take the steps to get there.
Thank you, Dr. Tate. Dr. Ware, what are your thoughts on this? Accountability. You don't want to be the bad guy and you don't want to be the bottleneck.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as I hear Dr. Tate and Dr. Cooney speak. It's clear that we all had a very similar thought process to this question that you had posed to us, and I think it all starts with values. I heard both of them talk about the values, and clearly they've put thought into not only the core values that the practice comes up with, but the core values that maybe lead their own individual lives. And that kind of trickles through and translates. And, that's an exercise that we go through every couple of years. We reestablish our values, but it's something that, again, during our critical thinking, I think about a lot. And, as a leader, I think we can't rest on our laurels of what we have done, what we have accomplished. We need to continue to be expressing these core values. And when we're talking about accountability, I think your team has to have trust in you as a leader, and there needs to be alignment, just as Dr. Tate had said and referenced the canoe. You can put all the best team members together, all the all-stars, but if they're not in alignment, you're not going to get to the Super Bowl. It's not going to happen. And so, I think developing that trust and having the ability to have these conversations that are not emotionally charged, because when somebody makes a mistake, this is part of our job as the leader to deal with these mistakes. And I never approach a mistake with emotions. I have it as more of a discussion of, oh man, that's not a good situation that happened. We can all agree upon that. What do we learn from it? What should we have done? What should we have not done? What could we do moving forward? And if there's not alignment in that conversation, when there's no emotion attached to it, that's maybe that person's not fit for the company. That doesn't have to be an emotional decision. That can be very matter of fact. And, I've had to make tough decisions where I felt like I had a great person, but the alignment wasn't there. And, I think at that point, that employee probably comes to the same conclusion after that conversation, that, you try to minimize emotion and say, man, this is not working out. Like I might like the person, but this is not where I don't see this heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
And not all conversations go that way. Obviously, most of the time it goes great, especially if you can have a real conversation with somebody, and that helps reinforce the trust of that relationship. And then I think that trickles through to alignment, and then own individual personal responsibility and accountability. So it's like there's a spectrum. In my vision, there's like a spectrum of how that accountability develops. And I think for me, I think it starts with building trust, building that communication, describing that vision that you have and all the components that kind of feed into it. And then people feel accountable for themselves in the end. So I guess that's my thought process.
I have a follow-up question for you, Dr. Ware, because for our listeners, do you have advice for any of them who may be struggling with that emotional piece? Like if they feel like they are too emotional in having these conversations, do you have any advice for how do they take the emotion out of it? How do they make that distance happen?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I'll tell you how I do it, is
Okay.
that I think about my own values, and two of my biggest values are kindness and gratitude. Intention and alignment are on there as well, which resonates when Dr. Tate made that analogy in regards to alignment. But at the end of every day, I go around the whole hospital before I leave, and I thank everybody. And in the morning, welcome everybody. We kind of talk about the day, and like I ask people about their families. Like with all of my employees, I want to know who they are. I want to I want to have that open communication so that those discussions, when we have to have more challenging discussions, we already have a relationship. I know this person. We can have a conversation without being super emotionally charged, and that helps me. Maybe it won't for some people because they're acting as more like have a friendship. And I'm friendly with my employees, but I can't say that I have like real friendship with my employees. But nonetheless, I think when there's a large distance between leader and employee in terms of a tiered system, I think those conversations are harder because an employee might be scared or worried, especially if you got a boss that's like, that's emotional, or they got a short temper, or they're like, God, this conversation is not going to go well. And as a boss, even though they have anxiety over those conversations too. And so if we can remove that distance and have more of a conversational sit down, I think it makes those conversations a lot easier, personally.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts?
So I'll add on to Dr. Ware, because when I, first started really kind of stepping into this, and Brenda coached me from the very beginning, but I was emotional. I was very emotional because everything was very personal, and I was, feeling like I didn't really know what I was doing. And, I got to go sit down and have this, really hard conversation. And, it's still a challenge, still a work in progress. We're all works in progress. What has helped me is I do know all my employees, at least on some level, to know a little bit about their personal lives or who they are, how they've developed. And that helps. But having these conversations where, it's very much factual. Like, this is not a personal, like, this is not personal on you. This is what's happened. This is how it is in contradiction with the core values of the practice. And this is how it's affected your teammates, or this is how it's affected your client care, or this is how it's affected our patient care, and this is what we have to do about it. It has helped kind of keep the emotion out of it, on my end. Also having a very highly sensitive 18-year-old daughter who reads facial expressions better than any poker player I've ever seen has also taught me that that's a lot how some of my, young people that work for me, they're reading my body language before I ever, open my mouth. So, I've had to learn how to exhale and relax and assure them before the meeting gets started. And so some of it is teaching them a little bit of emotional intelligence, and what we're about to say is it's not a personal attack. It's just, this is something we all have to deal with. It's a little adulting coaching of like, this is how we can handle this communication better, or this is how we can handle an interpersonal conflict better. And so, when I looked at it through that lens, of, some of these younger, early 20s people that are coming in that, didn't have a lot of contact and communication through maybe their COVID years, and, they need a little bit of that skill. And so, I've gone back and kind of revisited the communication in those meetings, to kind of just stick with how the events that led to having this meeting affect the core values, the mission and vision, and the patient care, and the client care, and the teamwork aspect, and that's helped me remove my emotion from it. And I think it's starting to translate.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you all for joining me today. And thank you to our audience for flying with us on Flight Plan Quick Consults. If today's insights helped you climb to new heights, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your crew. Until next time, keep your mission clear, your team aligned, and your practice soaring.